Well, it's a terrific show, and I'm so thrilled actually to find Neil's Portals of Ascension because, I think we're going to be doing a whole series. I showed him some of my presentations on Atlantis and the Divine Mother, and the galactic alignments that are happening in the planet, and ancient civilizations and ETs, and he was like, "We got to do some series."
Well,
So we're
you are
planning
the
one.
portal to ascension. Ever since we met like 20 years ago, I knew that about you, that you
Well,
were.
to me, you are spiritual family, Alan. You're just such a bright light in the world, and you're always working towards truth. You
Mhm.
have such an open heart, and you're so inclusive with everyone, and you're such a great MC. Goodness.
Well, I've been practicing. I know I've been doing, of course, my show for people who don't know, New Realities for the last, I guess, 20 years. I'm also going to be at the Conscious Living Expo in LA. Are you going to be there? Yeah.
I've done that show for some years, but I'm actually under contract for a new book with my publisher, Inner Traditions, and they're great. But that book has to be turned in March, and so I'm handcuffed to the computer working on it. As you know, I have three books out in print and about 13 online books and a lot of
I don't
DVDs.
know how you write so much. These are massive volumes, and I guess anybody who wants to order your book can go to your website, Tricia McCannon Speaks.
Yeah, in fact, I just put a page up about Neil's wonderful webinar conference this weekend. So yeah, you've got lots of things that you can see. There are a lot of things that are free there, from audio presentations to YouTube videos. I have online classes. I teach a whole mystery school, as you probably know.
I
I've
do
done that.
know. I didn't I help you bring out your channel a little bit?
Yes, actually, I've been on your New Realities TV show two or three times. I always love it. And I'm coming up to New York in
Okay.
September to do the Omega Institute. I'm doing a whole weekend on the Egyptian mystery. So this should be fun.
Right. Oh, I just want to say for people in New York this weekend, I'm going to be emceeing the Travis Walton documentary at the Cinema Village. That's tomorrow, Saturday night, 6 p.m. Have you seen the Travis Walton documentary?
I haven't, but I know Travis and Mike Barra, and they are, very authentic, the real thing, very good people. I'd love to see your documentary.
Well, it's not my documentary. It's Jennifer Stein's, but I'm just emceeing it. But I think it's really worth seeing because all this is building to, and what you're talking about, the truth coming out. I mean, we need to talk
It
about
is. It is indeed. And let me say,
it.
I know you guys can't see me, but hopefully everyone can hear me okay. And we've got
Yeah.
lots of exciting slides. I've cut this down from about 200 slides, but I know it's about 425 and they're giving me an hour and 45 minutes. So if you're good with it, away we go.
Yeah, it just came up. So let's go with your presentation. I'm going to disconnect this and welcome everyone. My good friend, everyone's good friend, Tricia McCannon. Thanks for
Well, you,
being here.
you can stick around, Alan. I always
I'm just
love
going to
it.
take my camera off, but I also wanted to say this is very generously brought to all of us by Portal to Ascension, and you can check that out on Facebook. They have an amazing lineup all weekend long. So go ahead, Trish. It's all
Thanks
yours.
so much. Well, hi, everybody. I see that there's so many wonderful people out there, from everything from Hawaii to the Netherlands to, Arizona and Pennsylvania and Germany. I'm just so amazingly impressed by all of you attending this conference around the world. So, my name's Tricia McCannon, and for those of you who don't know me, I travel and teach and speak about UFOs and hidden history and consciousness. And I have actually long been involved with the extraterrestrial movement because I've been on board the ship since I was little. And I don't normally talk about my own personal involvement a lot because my dad was a lawyer and I grew up in the deep South where, fundamentalist Christianity was here. So I tend to ground everything with history and archaeology and anthropology. And even in my books about the great mysteries and Jesus and the divine feminine and the hidden history of the planet, I have many illustrations and probably over 1,200 footnotes. So I try to be very grounded in my presentations. But of course, like many of you, I've had my own very mystical experiences. And I have presentations and books on those things. But this is a pretty grounded presentation that's going to really have about 4 or 5 sections to it. We're going to be looking at some of the historical research around extraterrestrials visiting this planet in the ancient past. We're going to be looking at modern day sightings. We're going to be looking at the media campaign that was launched in the 1990s. So while there was public denial, there was also this sort of subliminal programming that the powers that be were doing to try to help get us used to the idea that there were extraterrestrials. And I was, of course, speaking during the 90s. So as a commercial advertising photographer, which is what I did as my straight Clark Kent life, I traveled around the world and wound up taking lots of photographs of these wonderful, fun ads I think you'll enjoy. And then hopefully we're going to have time to actually take a look at not only some of the strange ships and anomalies that are coming in to our planet, but also
Tricia, did we lose you?
No, I'm right here. Can
Okay,
you hear me?
You just faded out for a second. Go ahead. Thanks.
Yes, good. Yeah, anytime I am, please let me know. So we were talking about the 5 sections of this presentation: the ancient civilizations, evidence, the modern sightings, the media campaign launched by the corporate elite in the 90s that was publicly denying the fact that ETs existed and yet trying to subliminally condition us to get used to them. The strange and anomalous ships that have begun to show up in our skies that are far different from just the classic flying saucer. And then finally, the strange archaeology of some of the amazing bones and discoveries and creatures that we have evidence of that are visiting this planet today. So we have a lot to cover, about 163 slides. So without further ado, we're just going to kind of jump in. So this presentation is called UFOs in the World Today, Transdimensional Contact and Its Implications in a Changing World. Certainly, extraterrestrial visitors have been coming to our planet for before humanity was even here. This is a classic thing that happens from the Galactic Council, where they seed worlds, and they seed worlds with vegetation. And then the next wave, of course, is the animal kingdom. The next wave is the human kingdom, and eventually beginning to step up the DNA. And that's because planets are made to be inhabited by souls who are in some stage of spiritual evolution. And so we have lots of evidence, as we're going to see, that they have been coming. I thought that this was really a fun juxtaposition of a modern day cartoon of a modern day astronaut, and here are ancient astronauts that look extremely similar. Here's another one over here, and of course here most of you have probably seen a bigger close-up of this, but it looks like a little capsule with a human being laying in it, although it's not quite as clear as it could be because there's so many images on this page. This comes all the way from 10,000 BC. And again, we seem to see beings that either have luminous lights like halos around their head, or some kind of head apparatus, very much like an astronaut would visiting another planet. And this is actually from Italy. Very similarly, we have something that looks like almost a deep sea diver here with the same kind of headgear, and we have strange little disc-shaped UFOs. And these are cave paintings that are from Kimberley, Australia. Same kind of thing here. We have visitors that seem to have very large eyes and either some kind of glowing head or some kind of headgear that seems to give off a radiance. But you can see there's a lot of effort that's been made. And this is actually from 6000 BC in the Sahara Desert, and it comes from North Africa. Now, there are some cave paintings here that are found in the area around Algeria. These are, again, very similar figures with this sort of astronaut kind of headgear that have been found in caves in France and many other places. And you can see some of these raise their hands towards a giant being, or they have a non-human appearance, but the round heads seem to kind of hover in the air or radiate light. Here we have more cave paintings. This is from Tanzania, and they're estimated to be some 29,000 years old, which is, goodness gracious, a long time ago. This would definitely have taken us all the way back to the time of Atlantis. And these are cave paintings showing some kind of disc-shaped objects here. And so either they had flying hats or, it's a UFO. And here the same kind of thing with the UFO that seemed to be either lights around the rim, or the best that they could depict in these cave paintings, or perhaps this is a mothership with little scout ships. We've seen balls of light like this that during World War II were called foos fighters. So this was actually shown on the History Channel and other ancient cave paintings. Now, one of the most famous that most people don't even realize when they're looking at something that archaeologists called a pyramidion. This is a pyramidion, and it sits right on the top like a capstone of these tall, incredible obelisks. And of course, there were many, many obelisks in Egypt, and they actually acted as acupuncture needles to draw energy, like the meridians of the body, but this was the meridians of the earth, in order that the prayer work of the priests and the priestesses and the ancient mystery schools could be sent out all over the planet. As we know, the ancients seemed to understand the use of ley lines and electromagnetic energies, and they seemed to use these, and they placed most of these sacred holy sites like Stonehenge and these obelisks at key places, and they were able to actually influence world consciousness by doing this. Now, this pyramidion actually is very much like a space capsule. We can see here. They called this the Bin Bin stone. And if you begin to study the ancient mysteries, you find out that this Bin Bin stone, the original one, which looked like this, opened up, and inside there was all sorts of electronic gear, and some of the most sacred records of the Anunnaki gods were kept here. This capsule was kept in a city called Heliopolis. Helio means the sun, polis means a city, and that's the Greek term, Heliopolis, for the major spiritual religious city in all of Egypt. Let us call it the Omphalos, or the key nodal point in all of the Egyptian temple system. This was up in the headwaters of the Nile, about 12 miles north of the Giza Plateau. And only the high priest was allowed to go into this original Bin Bin stone. And it was said to have belonged to the god Ra. So Ra, of course, was Marduk in the ancient Anunnaki gods. So this is really interesting that, it's kind of like the cartoons about how the ancients worshipped these things. And of course, the high priest, I'm sure, knew what this was, but by the time it gets stepped down, it becomes the pyramidion. Most of you are familiar with this really incredible, all these gold plains that have been found in Bogota, Colombia. Archaeologists claim that these are butterflies or these are birds, but of course they don't really look like butterflies or birds, do they? In fact, they look very much like some kind of scouter ship, and here's a head of a human being who's sitting in the front cockpit as the pilot, and they're really made of pure gold, and they're really quite beautiful and incredible. I love the designs on them, much as we would do with our own airships today. Most of you are probably familiar with the incredible temple of Abydos. Abydos was the place where Osiris's temple was. And Osiris, you may remember, was the son of Ra. Osiris was sort of like the Christ of his day. And he and Isis, who were married, were, beheld sort of the devastation of the flood. And they wound up being committed to humanity to make a difference after the Great Flood. Isis stayed in Egypt and reset civilization, where Osiris, both of them being Anunnaki gods, traveled some 450 years around the world, bringing food to people, showing them how to plant crops. This is why he was known as the green god. And this temple in Abydos is very interesting because if you've ever been to Egypt, the Nile is like the spine of a human being, but it's the spine of the country. And the great temple systems were set up as chakras, going from the south at the base chakra to the north at the crown chakra. And as you follow them up through the systems, I've taken groups to Egypt to do this initiatic journey. north really of Luxor, which is the heart chakra, and Karnak, which is the high heart chakra. There's a 3-mile causeway between them. And then there's Dendera, which is the throat chakra. That's where Hathor's temple is. And then north of that was Abydos. Now, Abydos is now largely, that area is taken over by bandits. And so when you go, literally, you have to go in armored buses with, people with shotguns and things like that. But the way that the hieroglyphs were created, the lower register usually deals with either mineral life, plant life, animal life, or it deals with the past. The middle registers of the temple deal with current events, or they deal with the humans, and the higher registers deal with the gods or with the space travel. So you can see here's an even better image of it. Some remarkable images that clearly show what looks to be a helicopter here, what looks to be some kind of a flying plane. This looks like Luke Skywalker's little speeder, and this looks almost like a submarine. And so, of course, archaeologists just don't even know what to make of this. If you look over here, you see an image of what is a bee. The bees, this is connected with the great spiritual mysteries. The pharaohs were called the beekeepers, and the Mithrin priest, the high priest, the magi were called the beekeepers. The original beekeeper of all was Isis, the divine mother, the I am principle. And of course, we notice how the patriarchy has now turned the terrorist group of ISIL into ISIS, sort of like the war on Terra, T-A-R-A, the war on earth, the war on the divine feminine. It's just such a crazy patriarchal world we're living in. So this symbol of the bee has to do with the Anunnaki gods, and it has to do with those who bring the mysteries to life. Because in the ancient world, there were only 2 preservatives known. One was salt, and the other one was honey. And so these are beings who preserve the wisdom or the nectar of the mysteries of life and death, and transdimensional consciousness and the higher dimensions for the initiates. And they were the ones who preserved it for our time, so that this information would not be lost, despite the fact that we've been in sort of a low place in consciousness for the last 1500 years on this planet. So I think this is just quite remarkable. Most of you are probably also familiar with this. This is found in a hidden cavern. I mean, it's like you have to go down in the dark in Dendera. Now, remember, Dendera was Hathor's temple, so it had to do with sound and light frequencies. There was a lot of healing that was done in that temple. Hathor really was, if you're familiar with the Anunnaki god, she was Ninharsag, the mother of humanity, really. And this was her temple, and her priests and priestesses were like psychologists who were working with sound healing and light healing and so forth. But of course, this literally looks like a gigantic light bulb. And the serpentine energy, I mean, how better to describe the living energy of fire or electricity? Snakes have always been associated with the power of the fire. Now, these are recent discoveries in Jordan, Syria, and Saudi Arabia, and they are burned into the rock itself. These are called geoglyphs. They're visible from the sky, but not on the ground, kind of like the Nazca plains. And they are actually quite large. They are between 82 feet and 230 feet across, and they literally look like landing pads where UFOs came down, and the heat signatures of the ships itself burned the rock. And of course, researchers really have no idea what this is, because they're not thinking outside the box. If they're thinking, traditionally, they have no answer for what this is. But this has been spotted now with new satellite mapping technologies. And they're referred to, of course, as wheels or stone structures. But they look very much to me like landing burn marks on the ground. These are geoglyphs in the Middle East, and this looks very much like the Nazca Plains. This one's in Jordan, and it's amazing. They say that this is actually older than the ones in Nazca. And really, if you follow the history of the Anunnaki gods, and those are whole other presentations that I'm happy to share with you in another webinar, the beings that were involved in transporting, gathering the gold, transporting the gold through their space stations up to their planet in order to heal the atmosphere of their planet because they were having problems with their ozone layer eroding. They had a lot of time on their hands. And so a lot of these guys, just like our guys, if they have nothing to do, they play cards and they, find a hobby. And so one of their hobbies was creating these incredible, hieroglyphs that we're able to see really only from the air. And of course, they do serve a function of being able to tell the pilots on these ships that are coming and going where to land. So that's kind of very interesting. This is a real interesting one too. At the time of Atlantis, there were still dinosaurs around, not a lot of the gigantic ones like the T-Rexes and things like that that were wiped out at the time of the asteroid hitting the Yucatan 65 million years ago. But there actually have been quite a number of statues that have appeared of human beings interacting with dinosaurs. And this is a Triceratops. He's a grass eater. And so obviously they were using them as transportation animals, at least in one of the eras of Atlantis. Now, this is really amazing. I always think of this one as the Buster Brown footprint. If you kind of look at it where the cursor is, here's the line of it. And there's like a break here, and it comes around the heel and then like this way. So you can see it outlined here, but you could actually see it naturally here. This was found actually near Antelope Springs, Utah, and the soil, they're able to do carbon 14 dating, and they figure the soil is around 500 million years old. That's just like absolutely incredible. So, either some space guy got out of his ship and was walking around and his boots, burned this, maybe whether they were hot or there was some temperature variance, but it wound up leaving this imprint. And it's very much like a modern shoe. This one is really remarkable. It's a coin that was found in Illinois at a depth of about 114 feet. Now, Homo sapiens were created around 200,000 years ago, and Homo sapiens sapiens came up about 40,000 years ago. This is the best that we can tell basically from the classically accepted archaeological or anthropological version of reality. So what's interesting about this is the carbon dating in the soil takes us back to 200 to 400,000 years. So the question becomes, who created the coin? If Homo sapiens only kind of started 200,000 years ago, I don't think they, suddenly popped into being and said, let's make money. Although maybe there's some people today that would say that, but let's make coins. That's an idea. We just come out of the trees. So what's interesting, if you look at it, there seems to be a very big being here with a kind of a small being. So, and this big being does not seem to be actually being very nice to this small being. He kind of has him by the throat. So what a strange, image of obviously some kind of a titan or large giant being with a smaller being. And maybe the smaller being are the human beings at that time. It would be nice if we actually knew what the writing around it says, but unfortunately we don't know how to translate that. This one is probably one of the most mind-blowing because there's a whole series of these metallic spheres that have been found in South Africa, and they are machine grooved, and there's not just one of them, but they were found in Precambrian mineral deposits that are said to be 2.8 billion years old, and what the planet Earth is, we think, around 6 billion years old. So, either there were earlier civilizations on this planet, or, some ETs came and they had to, unload some of their metallic, space debris, and they left it on our soil. But there's no way that anything other than a machine could have made these very precise grooves. Now, this is something most people don't know about, and something I've been tracking because I'm very involved with the mysteries and the Egyptian, wisdom schools and all of that. And Thoth, of course, was a great bringer of light within the Egyptian mystery schools. And this is one of his two zoomorphic forms. It's the ibis bird, and he's known as the scribe of heaven, the god of wisdom, and so forth. He actually invented the 26-letter alphabet that we have today, that we use in English and many, many other languages like French and Spanish and so forth. But these are metallic discs that are made of bronze that were found in a cave area I think it's in Arkansas. And I have seen other artifacts like this from the area around Illinois. So if we look at this, these are, here's our Ankh symbol, classic Ankh symbol. This is a symbol of the mystery schools here. It's the pi symbol, or the gateway of initiation. That dot in the middle has to do with the middle path. And so we have the left-hand path, the right-hand path, or the male and the female. And the path of mastery, of course, is the path of union between the two. And so this is just quite remarkable to find these Egyptian artifacts actually in the United States. And you can see this was an article in Ancient American that was really talking about this anomalous discovery. This is out in the Southwest, where there are all sorts of strange petroglyphs, and many of you may have been out there and seen them. I've traveled pretty extensively, and so I actually have seen a lot of these, and they definitely look like some kind of space being. So, our ancestors, who were the Native Americans at that time, did the best they could to try to depict what they were seeing. And it looks like to me that these beings either have really tall antennae, or perhaps there was some kind of headgear that had the antenna, but very unusual. We're all familiar, of course, with the stories of the descent of the gods in the Old Testament. And of course, the way that the Hebrew tradition turned it, that the Christian and the Muslim, cultures or religions picked up, was that there was a God Most High, and that would have been Enki within the Anunnaki, and then there were other gods. But once it got changed within the Hebrew, there was God, and then there were angels or archangels, or there were workers, or there were competing gods, and we had to get rid of them. And then, of course, they became demons or devils. And so this is, of course, one of the famous sightings by Ezekiel, who talks about seeing some kind of apparatus in the sky that came down and picked him up and took him away, that had wheels within wheels. And lots of artists have tried their best to figure out what the heck it meant. And probably it looks more like a disc where there were rotating wheels underneath. But this is one artist's depiction of some sort of flying craft where the beings were sitting in it, and they could land, and you can see this guy, you can step out onto the ground and then interact. So it's kind of a great mystery, but I think it's pretty clear that it's some kind of technology that our ancestors couldn't understand. Likewise, we have the famous stories in the Old Testament of Mount Sinai. And what happened for a long time, the gods, when there were fewer humans, interacted with humanity. And at the time of Atlantis, they actually had a city that humans were not allowed in, but they did interact at a pretty semi-regular basis. But after the Great Flood, they made a decision to basically build a lot of underground bases and to create cities on top of mountain tops where the people really couldn't get to them too easily. I think there were so many people that they were driving the gods crazy. And so in the story of Mount Sinai, many times you have these holy mountains like Mount Hermon or Mount Sinai or Mount Olympus. And of course, if you remember the story in the Old Testament, there was fire and roaring sounds like engines that were landing on top of this mountain. And Moses knew to, hey, climb the mountain and go up. And there he was given these blue lapis tablets that were inscribed like in laser. And it was a big deal. And of course, after he broke them, he had to go up and actually take dictation himself. But someone has actually done a depiction of some of this with art. And similarly, the story about how there was a pillar of fire by night that the Hebrew tribes followed, and then it would stop and be stationary. And, I mean, do we really believe that they were wandering in the desert for 40 years? Maybe they were. But if you've looked at that area, you'd have to go around in a lot of circles. And there's some very interesting evidence about this. There's actually a guy who wrote a book about was Jehovah an ET. And as silly as that name might sound as a book title, the guy's actually a biblical scholar who goes in and figures out how many times Yahweh told them to feed him. And it was like, please kill, 1,500 lambs, 1,200 cows, and roast them in this way. And then, take them into the temple and we'll beam them up. And so it's pretty compelling evidence that there was something going on here that was just, again, beyond the complete understanding of the humans at that time. Certainly they realized that they were dealing with a very powerful extraterrestrial force that could smite them mightily if they did not obey. And so they did the best they could to obey, but 40 years is a really long time to, have a lot of people running around the desert without a lot to do. So I think this is an incredible painting. This is a baptism of Christ from the 1700s, and you see it right up here. And there are rays of light coming down. Just extraordinary. This is one from the National Gallery in London that again shows a UFO, and here's a close-up of that UFO with a beam of light coming down, and you see the beam is coming right down on Mary. And the Annunciation is, of course, the announcing of the birth of Christ and classically in the New Testament, it's the angel Gabriel that was sent to tell her that she was pregnant and going to, have this incredibly conscious and aware being that became, Jesus. And so this is, again, extraordinary that in the Middle Ages, they're putting this in their art. And here's a close-up of that beam of light coming right down on Mary's head. And you notice it's coming right through the crown chakra. I find that interesting. And here's the angel. And here, of course, they had to stick the Pope in. So the Pope was so special. He's got the beehive hat on, that he got to talk with the angel, even though, of course, popes didn't exist at the time that Jesus was born. And here's another one. Many of you may have seen this one. It's quite extraordinary. Here's Mary and here's Jesus. And it's believed that this is actually John the Baptist, who was 6 months older than Jesus. And I talk about, them in my book about Jesus and the lost years and the great mysteries. John the Baptist was probably an Aries, a pretty hot-headed Aries, and Jesus was more than likely a Libra, although I take a look at several different possibilities for when he could have been born. But right here in the background, and here's a close-up of this, is what appears to be a UFO. And when we look carefully, we see a man with his hand up actually looking at it with his dog. Here's his little dog. And this is a close-up of the ship, again, radiating some kind of a light. And just absolutely extraordinary that they got away with this in religious paintings. And you see they had to kind of be a little subtle. This one is a huge tapestry that hangs above the altar in Kosovo, Yugoslavia. And here's Jesus on the cross, and here's the disciples, and all the regular things we're used to. But right up here in the sky is the strangest thing. This one is actually this close-up image of some kind of a being in a round ship chasing this being. And here, this being, you can see it's the same thing, just different color schemes, is looking back over his shoulder like, he's concerned that he's being chased. So this is extraordinary that this is right in the middle of this huge monastery, and it was painted in 1350 AD. This is a tapestry, again, lots of busyness. You can just see busy, 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 everything. But right up here in the sky are either flying top hats or in fact, UFOs. And here's another one over here. This is from the 1500s. So who in the world knew this information to even be able to put it in? And this gets down to the mysteries. This gets down to information I think that the church was very much trying to suppress and hide, is because the mysteries all knew about the extraterrestrial origins of humanity and the gods. Here's another one from the 1400s. This is now in the French Basilica Notre Dame, and it's the life of Mary. Probably Mary Magdalene, because she has blondish red hair. But right here in the background is another UFO. And here we are, another one from Burgundy, France in the 1400s. Once again, this is a tapestry. Imagine the amount of time and energy that went into this, and a UFO. This one is extraordinary. It's called The Miracle of the Snow, and it's from the 13 and 1400s. And it literally looks like a bunch of UFOs that are covered with clouds, like cloud cover, and Mary and Jesus are in one of them. So this hangs at the Church of Santa Maria Maggiore in Florence, Italy. Again, absolutely extraordinary that artists knew about this, that they painted it, they were allowed to get away with it, and maybe they, it was put up, and the inner circles of some of the priests knew about this and allowed it to happen without the Vatican's permission. So quite extraordinary. This one's called the Assumption of the Virgin, and if you remember the Assumption of both Jesus and Mary, that means they were taken up into the sky. That's what Assumption means. And so this appears to be a gigantic UFO. Now, perhaps these are dimensional levels. Perhaps this is the astral plane, the mental plane, the causal plane, or the higher spiritual realms. And maybe that's what it's meant to convey. Could be. But interestingly enough, they created this big UFO, or something that looks like a UFO. They put all of these saints and angels in. So once again, is it the initiates who could sneak things in here and there in order to try to get their point across? Perhaps it is. This one's called the Glorification of the Eucharist. It comes from the 1600s, and we see Jesus here, and we see who's supposed to be, I guess, God the Father over here with a long white beard, and this appears to be the earth. And bizarrely enough, what are they doing? They seem to be placing some kind of antennas, which is just like, what is they thinking? Antennas. And in the middle, of course, is the Holy Spirit. But behind the Holy Spirit, and many times you'll see this actually stamped out when you start looking on the internet to try to find this picture. This will be all the detail of this will be destroyed, but look at the detail. This is like some kind of an octagon. Here's the edge, here's an edge, here's an edge, and it looks like some kind of a ship, and here's the other realm of the ship right here. Okay, so again, I think that these artists had to be very subtle, so that if someone said, what is that? They could make up some story about it. But nonetheless, they seemed, as initiates, to have encoded this in a lot of our religious work. Now, this is a UFO sighting over Angers, France from 842 AD. And you can see all the people pointing up in the sky. It's very difficult to see exactly what this is. Is this the actual ship itself? Is this the ship? You can see the outline. What are these white things? Are they releasing something? Or these small little scout ships that have been released from the mothership? It's hard to know. But what the story is around this, it really has to do with a battle that was going on between the French and the Saxons. And so basically it's depicting a Saxon siege of a castle in France in 776 AD. And this is a 12th century manuscript about this. And the English Crusaders had the medieval French completely surrounded when suddenly this group of flaming shields, very much like UFOs, suddenly appeared in the sky over the church. And of course, the Saxons assumed that the French were protected by the gods or by the UFOs, and they fled in fear, and the French won the day. And this actually happened a number of times, because it looks like the English, and I've been to England and I love England very much, but the weather is not so great about 8 months of the year. The English were always invading the French countryside because they had such pleasant weather. And definitely the extraterrestrials were trying to keep the French and the British from taking over each other's country. So there does seem to be some kind of support by the extraterrestrials for the French to stay autonomous. This is a very interesting one from Hieronymus Bosch. And if you remember, Hieronymus Bosch painted some very strange images of the lower levels of the astral plane that he thought of as hell. But this is a very strange image as well. This is from the 1500s, and it's at the National Museum in Lisbon. But here we have what appears to be the burning of a village. But what do we see up here in the sky? Well, this looks like some kind of ship with a light, and I don't even know what this is. It's almost like either a ship or a flying fish. And then this appears to be some kind of a winged a vessel of some description. It's way too big to be a bird, and a bird wouldn't make any sense anyway. What would a bird be doing in all these flames? And so many times when disaster comes, it does seem that the ETs come over to sort of see what's going on. So there's obviously a bigger story about this. This one is from Nuremberg, Germany, from the 1561. And look at the size of this town, and look at the size of this mothership. This is astonishing. This was commemorated in a number of woodcuts and paintings and drawings at the time because it was a very big deal. It appeared that there was almost some kind of a aerial battle or exercise that was going on in the heavens. And here again, this is Nuremberg. You can see this large disc. I mean, these are gigantic ships, like cylindrical ships of some sort, over an entire city. And here we are. The story tells us that the battle began at dawn, and it lasted for 1 hour. And you see all these globes. Here are light ones and dark ones. So, this was astonishing. There were no airplanes. There were no spaceships that humanity knew about. I mean, the only thing they knew that flew were birds at that time. And this is even more remarkable. This was such a big event that it was commemorated on coins. Now, these coins are from 1556 and 1547. They're French and Roman coins, but we found other coins that go back as far as 197 AD. Again, here's a pastoral countryside. This appears to be a human being, with fields and hills. And here we see a big UFO, or the largest flying mushroom we ever saw in our life, with, poofy clouds. And over here, same kind of thing. And this is incredibly well drawn. And here is some kind of battle with spears going up to the UFOs. And so, imagine, an event that happens in modern day times that's big enough that we mint a coin around it. So this must have been very, very significant events that they created a coin to testify to its existence. This is Mayan, and these are recently discovered. Again, strange little almond eyes here, something that looks very much like a UFO or flying saucer. And same kind of thing here. And they show a depiction of one of the beings that was in this craft. And this is really remarkable. I mean, you just can't even argue with this. Maybe Hieronymus Bosch, we can say it was a gigantic flying pelican, but this is clearly a UFO. And if you remember those Syrian Jordan circles that I showed you on the rock in the beginning, look at the base of this. This looks very much like those. I've not been able to find any information about this. The painting style is from, it looks like the 17 or 1800s, and the ship looks very much like it's a clipper ship of some description. So this was obviously painted in that area. And if anybody knows any information about this that they can send me, by all means do. It's I've traveled a lot and taken a lot of photographs at a lot of museums in order to really bring you this information. But I find this really interesting, how the base of this looks very much like those Syrian stone glyphs. Well, certainly, as we can see, UFOs and extraterrestrials have been with us a very long time. And those of us who know that they exist and, believe in their existence, a lot of us are having to deal with friends and family and employers that think we're maybe a little on the crazy side. And, I think it would certainly be a lot easier if, in fact, they landed on our front lawn and we could take a picture and say, look, I told you it's true. I'm not crazy. It's really is, the real deal. But unfortunately, this doesn't really seem to happen. If it appeared on the news, as occasionally there'll be a little mention on the news, and then you'll notice it's jerked right back and total silence. Occasionally we hear something, but it goes away very, very quickly. So if they would allow it to come out, I think people really would, get used to it. Most of us believe that, it would be an incredible waste of space if we were the only inhabited planet out there. It's not even statistically logical. However, ETs don't do that. In fact, they seem to be, largely clandestine, and they can, look at this one. This is one over in China. You cannot even see the ship. All you can see is this slice of light here with the light coming down. So if we didn't see that slice of light, we would not even know that the UFO was in the sky. This one is obviously completely masked by clouds. The only thing we see are the lights. Often they hide themselves in clouds. Some of them seem to have invisibility cloaks. Some seem to have cloud cover cloaks. This is actually a real photograph of one of them. This is actually, I think, a photoshopped image. So this is not a real image. I mean, not a real authentic photograph of one. But they're able to sort of wrap themselves in this cloud cover, much like this one. And you can see details, hard rims. I mean, clouds don't really look like that. These are lenticular clouds, and certainly some lenticular clouds may actually just be clouds, but they may very well be motherships. You can see this with a real hard edge. I mean, look how different this image is from these clouds that are, puffy or cumulus nimbus clouds or cirrus clouds. This has a hard edge and very clear shadows to it. So it appears to me, but if it is a mothership, I mean, look at the size of it. This is an entire mountain range. That's a gigantic ship. It's astonishing. Okay. Now, certainly, some people think that they see UFOs and they're not alien spacecraft. But with the advent of video and photography and a lot of the internet, the word has gotten out. These are some of the classic things that people can confuse with UFOs. And of course, whenever they're reported, the government likes to say it's one of these. It's a weather balloon. It was an airplane. It was a comet. Never mind that it went, up in the sky instead of down. It was a fireball. It was a weather satellite. But all of these things actually act very differently. For example, weather satellites simply move at a very constant rate. They don't change course. They don't stop in the sky. They just move very, very steadily. Airplanes, I sat on the beach in Los Angeles a few years ago, literally watching a UFO blink into existence. And then after a few minutes of pulsing, another one blinked into existence. They went back and forth in their communication, appearing and disappearing in the sky. Then finally, one of them blinked out, vanished, and the other one put on running lights as if it was an airplane and began to move slowly in the sky with red and blue lights. And if I had just looked up at that moment, I would have truly believed that this was just a regular airplane. But because I'd been sitting there watching them for 15 or 20 minutes, I knew that it wasn't. So certainly they have learned to mask themselves so that they draw as little attention as possible. There are many different kinds of crafts, and this is just a short display of some of the ones that we've seen. But there are also long cylindrical ones. There are triangular ones, there are pyramid-shaped ones, and I'll be showing you some of those. There are third-dimensional craft. There are also fourth-dimensional and fifth-dimensional craft that are more organically alive. Third-dimensional craft are pretty much like, hardcore nuts and bolts and fiber optics. However, the fourth and fifth-dimensional craft are like light ships, and they respond to consciousness. Probably the beginning of the UFO movement began in America in 1942 with the famous UFO that was seen above Los Angeles. And The military shot at this. They did not know what in the world to do with it. And this was a very famous incident, but you can see all these lights coming from ground sources onto the ship trying to figure out what it is. And you can see the ship, it's kind of small, but it's hidden here. And this is probably the smaller version of a much larger ship because you can see a lot of lights around it. Certainly, we know that the ships tend to hover over power plants, they hover over sacred sites, they hover over active volcanoes, because in truth, what they're doing is they're monitoring what's going on the planet. They're quite concerned because the poles are melting and we are heading for a pole shift. We have, in fact, have had the North Pole shift some 9 degrees towards Siberia already. But if it moves incrementally, it creates, an ability for humans and animals to make an adjustment. And instead of mass confusion and, gigantic plate tectonic movements that then create, tsunamis, earthquakes, and, death for millions of people. And so they have been trying to stabilize the grids of the planet using crop circles all over the world. And there are a number of reasons for the crop circles. One of them is encoding the water aquifers that are underground in order to bring higher consciousness to all the beings that ingest that water. And the other one really has to do with slowing down the pole shift so that we have an opportunity to slowly move so that the pole shift that happens is incremental instead of suddenly. This is Popocatépetl. It's always hard for me to say the name of that volcano, but this is actually, there's a lava plateau that sits underneath Mexico City. And Mexico City, if this goes off and the lava comes up, Mexico City could go down literally in a hole of Stygian blackness. And that's one of the largest cities in the world. And so the ETs have been keeping a very close eye on this. There's a lot of sightings down in Mexico and South America. There are really lovely people down there, and nobody wants to see that city or those people be injured. Certainly over the Giza Plateau is another place, but these are some of the many places, military bases and nuclear atomic facilities, of course, because they don't want us to blow ourselves up. And this is one of the big things that's happened now is we have now reached the point that our consciousness with warfare could literally destroy the entire planet and every living thing on it. And in fact, even if we never used atomic or nuclear weapons, with the pole shift, all the nuclear power plants, like the one in Fukushima, if those things become destabilized and go off, we could create radiation on this planet that pretty much will end all life on the planet. And the extraterrestrials are not interested in having that happen. I'm sure there are ships that are sort of prepared that if such a thing were to happen, they would step in, because this is a paradise planet. This is really one of 12 third dimensional paradise planets, and no one wants to see the millions and billions of years of evolution and love that have been put into this planet be lost. So there is a concerted effort now within the galactic councils, not only for a lot of more enlightened star beings to come in and take human form and be born into our societies and grow up. Probably many of you listening to this broadcast are those people, as am I. Many of the people I think who are involved in the UFO movement are people who have been sent here with a mission, and the mission is to raise consciousness on the planet and to try to help the human beings, our brothers and sisters, who are stuck in these old fear-based, war-based, power-based paradigms to make the shift. So they're monitoring a lot of things. Now, when the UFOs first started coming, you would see them over observatories and these power plants. This is a teeny one over a Los Angeles observatory. This is in the very early days with the classic flying saucer. That's in Australia. But there was actually a downed UFO that Hitler got. Hitler was actually, quite astute. He had a lot of, he was very, very knowledgeable. And if he had not been on the dark side of the force, he could have been a great force for good in the world, because he actually knew about the change of the ages. He knew about the extraterrestrials. He was off base with some of the things that he believed in terms of history. But this is why, you hear the Raiders of the Lost Ark, where he was going for these artifacts because he understood that the extraterrestrials had been here. He thought that they came from Aldebaran, which they did not, although there are beings from Aldebaran that have a base on Ganymede, and they have been to our planet. They're very nice beings. But this is a ship. They had literally created a ship in Nazi Germany, and I have seen photographs and video. They had built a city in Antarctica called New Berlin. And this is why the Allies were desperate to launch the attacks in Normandy, because if Hitler had managed to really perfect this technology, we would have lost the war. And he knew about telepathy. He knew about the New Age coming in. He knew a lot of stuff. He just seemed like he used it for all the wrong reasons, and it's really a shame. This is another ship. Look at this one, Germany, 1940s. This is a UFO in the water. So, if he had only used his brilliance for the good, it would have been a totally different story. Most of us are very familiar with the 1947 crash in Roswell, New Mexico. Then they came out and said, "Oh, oops, it wasn't really a UFO. It was a weather balloon." Which, who's going to buy that? Of course, at that time, a lot of people did buy it. And of course, most of us are familiar with alien autopsy, where they supposedly performed an autopsy on a real gray alien. But they did take an alien into custody at that time, and that's a whole nother story about how Dwight Eisenhower discovered it, and he was a very good guy who wanted to release it and so forth. But there was a down ship and one live alien that in 1952 or 3, when he got into office, he actually convened a group of 50 teachers and scientists and people to sort of expose this information to them in confidence to see what their reaction was. And I've actually read a letter from one of the scientists who attended that, and he was so blown away. He said, we thought we were the pinnacle of God's grace and the only inhabited planet in the whole galaxy, and we're so brilliant and stuff. And we discovered we're actually on a kind of a backwater planet on the 2/3 of the way from the center of the Milky Way on the Orion arm, and that we're so far behind some of these other races. It had made him have a loss of purpose, and a loss of direction, and a loss of self-esteem. And of course, this is the argument that John D. Rockefeller used with Dwight Eisenhower. They were good friends, in order to convince him to not release the information to the public. He said, look, if you look at indigenous societies, when these more sophisticated technological societies come in, it completely destroys the infrastructure of the society, because the people lose their way. They lose their sense of feeling that their rituals are important and their beliefs are important. So why don't you just kind of let me have the technology from these down ships, and we'll back engineer it. And of course, they'll get all the corporate contracts, right, and make money. Yeah. And then once we bring the human race up to speed after 30 or 40 or 50 years, then we'll, let them know. And by that time, we'll have fiber optics, and we'll be sophisticated enough in our own technology that we can, get in there with the ETs and not feel so overwhelmed. And so this was sort of the beginning of an era in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s and the 80s of immense cover-up. And, this is declassified KGB files showing a UFO crash disk here. And then we have, a small black and white version here. But this actually has all been released in the last, 10 years or so. At this time, the ETs were trying to make contact, and there were several different groups that were trying to make contact. One of them was definitely the Pleiadians were here, human-looking extraterrestrials that are members of the Galactic Council that claim to be some of our closest genetic ancestors. And they basically were trying to get the attention of the government and to say, look, we're happy to consider inviting you into the Galactic Council, but first you have to give up your atom bombs. And and you have to give up, I don't think we had nuclear weapons at that point, but we had atomic weapons. Well, of course, we had just come out of World War II with Hitler, and we were like, absolutely not. We're keeping our weapons, we're keeping our toys, and, that's our power. And so it was this old paradigm of fear. And it's understandable considering, they had just come out of the madness of the whole World War II. But these are ships going over the Capitol. So we talk about, why don't the ETs come and land on the White House lawn? Well, this was about as close as it really came at that time. There were also, of course, the gray aliens that were basically willing to be clandestine and offer technology for underground bases and for the right to abduct cattle and people, as long as the people didn't remember. And that's who the government went into business with, basically. And again, it was, the whole military industrial mindset. And I'm sure that decision was made in part not only by the government, but by the MJ-12, which of course was made up of 6 military people and 6 scientist people. And this is another sighting of a huge ship. Look, this is a landmass here. And here we have a gigantic ship in Sag Harbor, 1967. Crashed. These are some of the older ones. This is Japan, 1986. This is a Japanese crew of a jumbo freighter witnessed 3 unidentified flying objects flying over Alaska. And again, once they began reporting this, and this was detected on radar, they found that many times their jobs were threatened. So many of them stopped reporting it. Here's the cattle mutilations. And of course, I've been out there speaking and investigating this stuff probably since the 80s. I had an organization called the UFO Forum here in Atlanta for about 10 years, where I brought in speakers, and then I got so busy speaking nationally and internationally, I didn't have time to do that in Atlanta. But this is amazing, because this is an actual photograph of a cow being lifted in the air. And here's another one of a ship pulling a poor little cow that they're probably about to vivisect. And here's another one, these cows in the field, and suddenly a ship is in the air. So who knows what unlucky bovine is going to be, lifted up and, taken for its parts. This is most of you may know about or may not know about a very famous case that happened in Gulf Breeze, Florida, and I live in Atlanta. So this is only about 6 hours from me, and I've been down to Gulf Breeze many times, seen UFOs come and go from the water. But this famous case happened in the 90s, and it was an architect named Ed Walters, or builder. And he didn't believe in UFOs. He wasn't interested in UFOs, nothing. But it was about dusk, and he went outside on his front porch and suddenly saw this UFO. And he went and got his Polaroid camera, and when he came back out, he began to take pictures, and then and suddenly the ship picked him up, and he was being lifted from the ground, and suddenly they dropped him, and a moment later his wife his car pulled into the driveway, and she had come home with groceries. And so, of course, as you can imagine, they were completely blown away, and they pulled the Polaroids he had taken that were falling on the ground, and they went inside and pulled them apart, and here were these pictures of the UFOs. And thus began quite an incredible story that MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, went on to investigate and do stakeouts about. And it appears that these were gray aliens that wanted Ed, and he was quite adamant that he would not be taken. This is a Polaroid he took literally from his windshield driving down the road, where one of them was hovering over the roadway, and they of course wanted him. And I think eventually they did wind up taking him. But as you can imagine, in the 1990s, early 90s, this played havoc with his career, because, you don't want to hire a contractor, who is a crazy person and thinks they've been abducted by aliens, if the whole world believes that, there are no aliens. So anyway, Ed was a very good guy, very grounded, and we haven't heard much about him for a while. And it was great, though, that he came out with that. We've just heard a long story about the famous Phoenix Lights in 1997, so I won't go any further about that, but it was an extraordinary case. This is another UFO over Arizona in 1997. Very clear, amazing photograph. They're triangular ships that have been seen all over the world, and some of them have been seen in the Brussels area. Belgium, of course, is the capital of the NATO conglomeration of countries over in Europe. And some of these have been tracked by radar. They've been photographed, and it's been estimated that over 13,000 people have actually seen them. And I give thanks to all the many researchers that are out there, probably some of whom are on the line with us now, listening to this webinar, who have taken these photographs. It's always really wonderful. Here's another one, a triangular craft over a missile site. Here's another one. This was over NATO headquarters, and this happened March 30th of 1990. A police captain observed a giant triangular-shaped object passing by in the sky. 2 F-16 fighters would attempt to chase the UFO, but were easily outmaneuvered. The NATO-operated base near Glans, just southeast of Brussels, would also report the UFO on their radar systems. And this is really because the UFOs have been very carefully monitoring the atomic and nuclear power plants in that area. And, you know, there are a number of accidents that would have happened that the UFOs have stopped, the ETs have stopped. They did not stop Chernobyl because clearly humans do not really learn from their mistakes too well. So we have to actually encounter disaster in order to change our ways. And so this is why they allowed Chernobyl to happen. But they have told me that there are, you know, at least a dozen of these incidences that they have prevented. The same thing with Fukushima. They've allowed one of these instances to happen, hoping that the leaders of the world would say, gosh, if we're putting nuclear radiation into the ocean, the sea, and the land, and part of Japan is now uninhabitable, what would it mean if this were to happen to nuclear plants all over the planet? But unfortunately, somehow our leaders, even though I'm sure they're intelligent people, have not seemed to ask these questions or answer the questions in a way that will safeguard the planet and all living things on it. With this incident, ground witnesses broadly corroborated the information obtained with radar. They described seeing a similar triangular UFO completely disappear from sight at one point, while a larger triangle moved upwards very rapidly as the F-16s flew past. And you can see that that was actually pretty clear. But these are, again, scout ships. These are not the big ships. The Billy Meier case is one of the most famous because Billy Meier, as you may know, was a one-armed Swiss farmer who began to have mystical experiences throughout his life, and by 1975 the Pleiadians had made contact with him. Again, the Pleiadians it's a nebula around 400 light years from Earth, and has been known as the Seven Sisters throughout time. They say that they've been to our planet many times throughout the centuries, including at the time of Atlantis, where we had both the Anunnaki, we had the Syrians here. They were heavily involved with Lemuria. We had the Pleiadians here. We had a real star capital going on at the time of Atlantis. And I think on February 28th, Portals of Ascension is going to sponsor me doing a whole 4 hours on Atlantis. So if you guys are interested, I think that's one of the first of the presentations we're going to be doing. I think I'm going to start doing a series with Neil. So how wonderful. But Billy Meier, this is one of his hundreds and hundreds of photographs. And I was quite active in the UFO movement during the time that all this was going on. And I was told that whenever Billy took any photographs of UFOs and he went to get his film processed, that the lab made 13 copies of his negatives for all these governmental agencies that were paying the lab to do so that they would also have the same information. These are some other ones that he's done. And of course, there was a really wonderful book called Contact from the Pleiades that was done some years ago that I have. But this is a guy who can't really focus the camera. He's only got one arm, so he can only hold the camera to his eye and snapped the picture. So it's pretty, and he lived in a farmhouse, for heaven's sakes. Very basic, a sweet guy, high consciousness. The Pleiadians really wanted him to get his message out, and he was not an extrovert. He was a very introverted person. And so thanks to Lee and Britt Elders, some of this information finally did come out to the world. This is another one. He was actually on board a ship and he was shooting down. And again, you see everything's in motion. He claimed that there were, of course, beautiful babes. That's every guy's fantasy, huh? Beautiful babes that were in the ship. And no, they were not scantily clad in bikinis, but this is two of the women. And of course, you can see he couldn't focus. His focus seemed to have been set at a distance. And so these are two of them he called Asket and Nera. Now, interestingly enough, this all took place in Germany. And this is a photograph from the 2009, that a guy named Robert Vandenberg took in Germany. And this is the actual image. It appears to be a light ship, but look, the shape is exactly like one of Billy Meyer's. And so Germany, which is a very beautiful country, by the way, I've been through there, and there's a lot of magic in the forest, the great forest and the mountains, and it's an ancient land. You can understand why both positive forces and negative forces have been drawn to Germany, because it's you can literally feel the dragon energy in the ley lines. You can kind of hear the dwarfs in the mountains from an earlier age. It's a powerful, energetic place on the planet. And so it's great that they've been attracting such high consciousness beings. So these are, the Pleiadian ships. Now, this is a very sophisticated, kind of transwarp, light ship. And this was shot by a guy who was a retired military officer in North Carolina. He was in his wheelchair in his backyard, and he saw these lights, and he went and got his camera and his binocular, and he watched this in the vacant adjoining lot that was near the woods behind his house. And it was a very big ship that changed its color, changed its formation many times over the course of the time that he watched it. And it was in a field about 100 yards away from his house. This is the same ship. And he was communicated with by these beings and told that this was a light ship that can transverse dimensions. And it also was a warship. So while these beings are not particularly interested in war and avoid it at all cost, they are aware that there are civilizations like our own that are addictively aggressive and don't seem to be able to see any other alternative. So it's nice to have protection. So this next series of slides I'm going to share with you are very fun, and it's really a series of ads that were done in the 1990s that hopefully they'll leave you holding your sides and laughing. So on the surface, we have had lots of public denial. No, ETs don't exist, and let's make fun of and ridicule anyone who believes in them. On the other hand, somehow the word went out from the Illuminati or the powers that be to the heads of these major corporations, some of whom I'm sure are, the downline of, let us say, the puppet masters that are controlling a lot of the world's economy. And they were told to inject ETs into their campaigns. And so here's our first one with Camel cigarettes. Isn't this just adorable? I think it's great. So our camels smoking, and they're coming. So they're giving us the subliminal message. Here's this one. How in the world do you bring UFOs and ETs into a minivan? Well, Chevrolet did a great job. This was Greetings, Earthlings, the Lumina minivan. That's 1995's ad. Look at this one. Crown Royal. How does a liquor company bring a UFO in? Well, obviously the ETs came to Earth for Crown Royal. It's I think it's a good whiskey if I remember correctly, but they're pulling it into their ship now and probably going to take it back to their planet. I loved this one. This is great. This was in Los Angeles. I was actually driving down the road. I was speaking at a conference there, and I saw this, and I pulled over to the side of the road, and it's an entire billboard, and it's 24-hour emergency response, and we see the UFO has gotten tangled in the power lines. That is just so funny. I mean, what are the odds that someone would do that ad? I mean, if we presented that ad today, I don't even think that they would do it. So it's extraordinary that this happened 20 years ago. Now, here too, this is technology. When you're out on the leading edge of space, of technology, where do you go for parts? So the idea is that this UFO has come to Earth and they've broken down, and they're going to go to this company to get their special parts. I think this was Yamaha, but don't quote me on that one. I think their logo is behind this. This is cheap pants. So here we are, we're buying jeans for our ET friends, the most comfortable pants in the galaxy, great for those long trips. I think this is just so remarkable and funny. This is Kodak, aliens in my backyard. I mean, what in the world Kodak cameras is doing, putting out something about the UFOs with a light over this person's house, and here they are looking out the window to try to figure out what's going on. And here is because you never know who's listening in. Actually, this is probably the Yamaha ad. And here we have a little ET, and he appears to have a radio receiver with an antenna and very big ears. And it's all about receivers. Here's an Absolute Vodka ad. Well, once again, those little gray aliens must really like the alcohol on our planet. Maybe they don't have potatoes on there, so they've come to Earth for Absolute Vodka, and they're pulling it up in their ship. And this one is Xerox copier. I'm sorry, it's a bit on the faded side, but these ads are about 20 years old. So the miracle is that I found them at the time, and I can't even remember what it's saying, but it's obviously about a copier. Now, at that time in the 90s, I think that they were preparing to bring this information out, and obviously something changed in the agenda, because we have major magazines like Newsweek and Time magazine covering this. I spoke at the Roswell conference. There were actually some really wonderful colleagues of mine on the UFO circuit, and there were 2 different events that were happening in Roswell at that time. And Roswell's very fun, and like any city, they capitalize on whatever their claim to fame is. But it's amazing that this was on the cover of Time magazine. And this is, of course, Independence Day, X-Files, and all of that kind of stuff, and that it's in Newsweek. There were also magazine articles that were coming out at this time by astronomers like Carl Sagan. And many of you may know that Carl Sagan kind of became the mouthpiece, really, for the official face of the NASA programs. I'm sure he was a lovely human being. And like many scientists, I think probably one of his first loves was for truth. And consequently, when you're having to, you're being given access to all this stuff that you want to know, but only if you're willing to tell the public that it's not necessarily so, which is, I think, what happened with Carl and many other wonderful scientists who have found themselves involved in the information behind closed doors. If they reveal it, they could lose their careers, they could be killed, their families could be threatened. And so they wind up at the place where they just kind of go along with it, because if it's not them, they're just going to pick, the powers that be are just going to pick another scientist to do it. Carl Sagan, unfortunately, died of cancer. Cancer, many times, as we know, is about repressed hurt or anger or grief or emotions or feelings, and that you're not allowed to express. There's no outlet for. And so I think he was one of those people who probably had access to a lot of those secrets and was trying to make sense of them, but was only allowed to bring a certain amount of information out to the public. At this time in the 90s, maybe some of you don't know this, there was a Rockefeller that was pretty lovely, much as Laura Eisenhower from the Eisenhower family is very lovely. His name was Lawrence Rockefeller, and he seemed to be very intent upon trying to make up for some of the um, inappropriate actions of his forebearers. For example, John D. Rockefeller, who had 4 homeopaths on staff for himself, bought into pharmaceuticals. And ever since then, homeopathy was suppressed. Of course, it's finally made a comeback, and pharmaceuticals have sort of been ruling the world along with insurance companies. And so, creating illness so that they can sell us drugs to treat illness. This was a John D. Rockefeller project. But with Lawrence Rockefeller, he appeared to have been a conscious man and a man of heart, and who was trying to make things right. And so he had this extraordinary conference called When Cosmic Cultures Meet. And there are quite a mixture of scientists, UFO researchers, theologists, anthropologist. You can see here Zachariah Sitchin is on this. My friend Colonel Don Ware. These are all colleagues of mine on the circuit. Leo Sprinkle, the lovely psychologist who's done a lot of UFO regressions. Ruth Montgomery, who wrote Aliens Among Us, and who was very much about the spiritual realms as well. Here's J.J. Hurtak, another friend of mine, who wrote The Keys of Enoch, who is he's quite extraordinary in his own way. Bill Baldwin, who I knew him. He lived in Florida. He was a person who communicated with demons, basically, that had invaded people's spaces, and he turned the demons towards the light and got them to leave people's bodies. Quite incredible. Here's Richard Boylan. James Deardoff, you probably recognize. Jaime Maussan, who's like the Dan Rather of Mexico, a wonderful journalist, highly respected in the UFO field, who's brought a lot of research from South America and Central America to audiences around the world. So this was quite an extraordinary event. All this took place in the 90s, and this was, of course, a heyday when I was probably in about 10 cities in the U.S. and 3 countries a year speaking on all of these subjects. So it was quite an incredible time. This was also a time when this extraordinary photograph was released. Some of you may remember it. It was the Amoco oil ad. And this has been analyzed, and there is a belief that this is a real being. There's a stipple to the skin, what appears to be perspiration, moisture in the eyes and the nostrils, and so forth. But again, it was kind of like, let's find out what the public reaction is if humans find out that these strange looking humanoids are among us. And this, as you can see, the Amoco logo right down here. So again, quite extraordinary. I hope you guys enjoyed that. Was that fun for you? If it was, just write me a little, note and say you enjoyed those. I think they're really fun, and you can't find them today. So now this is Dr. Michael Wolff. He is someone you probably have never heard of. He worked for the government. He was on the MJ-12 Council, 6 scientists, 6 military people. And, these are real photographs of gigantic crash ships. Just amazing. And here he is. Looks like a really nice guy, probably like Carl Sagan, a truly good man who was all for truth. These are actual real photographs, again, of UFOs in military hangars, crash ships. So let's read about Michael Wolff. He was an American scientist. He claimed he was a member of the satellite government for over 25 years. He had an MD in neurology, a PhD in theoretical physics, a bachelor's of science in biogenics, a JD, I'm not even sure what that is, in international law, and a doctor of science in computer sciences. He attained a very high above top secret clearance level and worked primarily on joint ET and human scientific projects. Now, this is extraordinary, okay? He's working with the ETs and with the humans on back engineering the technology. This is what they're talking about. During his final years, he spoke with various journalists about the UFO and ET cover-up. His bosses at the National Security Council gave him permission to generate a controlled leakage of secret information in a fictional book called Catchers of Heaven. I just saw someone's email. You want to know who's talking? This is Tricia McCannon from Atlanta, Georgia. So welcome. I see you just joined the call. We're in the middle of a presentation that's gone from ancient UFOs to modern day sightings to the ad campaign in the 90s to try to get us subliminally adjusted to UFOs. And now we're talking about some of the secret projects and some of the more recent unusual UFOs before we go into the strange archaeology. So you're about halfway through our presentation, so welcome. Okay, and you guys are welcome to just run this or whatever. It always makes us speakers feel good. So I've looked up Catchers of Heaven. It's something like $200 to $400 to $700 to get a copy of this book. It's obviously, he put it in a fictional form, but you can get it on Amazon, but my goodness, it cost a fortune. So, you can go and look it up if you'd like to. So, okay, Dr. Wolf worked in laboratories at Area 51 and S4 and the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in the Foreign Technology Division. Now, isn't that humorous that they're calling the ETs the Foreign Technology Division? That's just so funny. He also worked in Indian Springs and at the Dulce Base in New Mexico, where for 5 years, and this is a quote from him, I met with extraterrestrial beings every day in my work and shared living quarters with them. Now, that's an extraordinary statement. Imagine that that's your job. I met with extraterrestrial beings every day in my work and shared living quarters with them. Now, of course, there's a lot of different kinds of extraterrestrials out there. You've got the whole gamut. Many of them are very positive and very, let us say, want to help the earth and want to help humanity. Some of them, however, have their own agendas, and some of them have very balanced emotional bodies. Some of them don't have very strong emotional bodies. They're more mental, or they're more aggressive. There are a lot of different kinds. The humanoid, as we're going to see, the humanoid form is probably the most common form throughout this galaxy, but with a lot of variants. But we'll get into that a little bit later. So Wolf served as a scientific consultant for the American president, the NSC, National Security Council, on ET-related matters. He was a member of the Majestic 12 Special Studies Group and appointed head of its leading agency, the Alpha Con team, which specializes in gathering information on the different ET races. He died on September 18th, 2000 from cancer after a long period of ill health. We see the cancer again. So perhaps the cancer is caused by radiation from the ships, but my guess is it really has to do with the fact that these are seekers of truth that found themselves finding out truth that was not allowed to be released by the public. So they were sort of having to live a lie. And so this, of course, can create a jam up in the system that creates cancer. This is a sighting from Hartford, Connecticut, and this is actually kind of a close-up. It's an inset close-up. You can see how the screen changes of this little teeny ship here. But we begin to now look, and this is from a webcam shot, at some of the more recent sightings. Now, some of them look very much like the same little UFOs that we see in the 13 and 14 and 1500 tapestries that I showed you, just like it. This is in the UK in 2008. Here's in Utah. This one's quite a large one, literally right over a highway. This is near John Lennon's Peace Tower. It's a cylindrical ship, and this is like the one I showed you earlier for China, where you literally cannot see the ship at all, and except for this strip of light where the light is coming out, you would not even know that that ship was there. So that's quite amazing. Now I showed you the pictures of the UFO flap in 1952, but once again these ships began coming in the 1990s and in the 2000s over some of the big capitals of the world. And these sightings were seen in Washington in 1995, 1999, and 2005. And this is actually one that was reported from July of 2002. A former officer of the U.S. Capitol Police had leaked reports of UFOs and hyperdimensional ET spacecraft flyovers over the U.S. Capitol using email. The leaked reports confirmed specific UFO ET flyovers in April 22nd of 1999 and in the spring of 1995 and the P-51 restricted airspace over the U.S. Capitol. And we see here again what appears to be some kind of a ship. Can you sort of see that? It looks like there's fireworks going on here. So that's quite interesting. And it's over the Washington Monument. This is a very famous sighting in Jerusalem, January of 2011. There were 4 separate video cameras that recorded it. So here is the Dome of the Rock, as they call it. And the video actually shows this this UFO craft just going straight up, just like this. So amazing. And here it is again. This is at Annapolis. And Annapolis, of course, is a military school, military college in Maryland. And it happened in March of 2010. Here are the ships, and I'll show you the small versions. They kind of look like little shuttlecocks with badminton, don't they? But this is the ship, and obviously this is some kind of, I would think, some kind of an exhaust of some sort. But it could be that that's the shape of the ship itself or the energy signature. This is Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, 2008. Here's a ship, quite interesting. And we're going to see some, actually, we will see some others that are a little similar to this when we get into the Carlos Diaz case. This is China. China's had a lot of activity, by the way. And so here's one of the classic triangular ships that we've seen in Belgium or in Brussels a lot. But this UFO came so close to the airport that they shut it down, which is amazing. Triangular ships. This is more of northwestern China in June, July of 2010. Again, a ship we're only really kind of able to see the light, but we see some craft behind it. Again, Chinese sighting, same kind of thing. This is in the China airport. Oh goodness, someone's calling me. I'm just going to kind of ignore that. Let's just tell them. I'm in a webinar. Call me back in an hour. Thank you. Okay, so this is pretty interesting. You can see the literally 1, 2, 3, 4 lights, like steering lights on the ship. Okay, and look at these. These are blimp-like UFOs over America. Now, these have been seen by the hundreds in Mexico. Really amazing. Jaime Maussan has brought some of this information, and you can see here they've shown up in Britain, Holland, and Mexico. I've seen hundreds of them moving across the sky. What are they? Are they probes, light probes? We just really don't know, because some of this technology is technology that we don't understand. It's more advanced than what we're used to. Now, this is a satellite photograph over, I think it was over an area around Los Angeles. Look at this. You can literally see the UFO hovering above the houses from the satellite photograph. It's found on the GPS. Now, when we start looking at unusual craft, I love some of these. This one is clearly not a cloud. It's some kind of a ship that has created a cloud cover that looks like a ring, and the UFO is hidden inside of it, much as we spoke about before. And this is from Russia. This is, of course, the spiral over Western Canada in 2011, and similar ones have appeared over places in Europe. We are not sure what they are. There's a lot of speculation that they're opening interdimensional portals. Whether or not this is our own government playing, or governments of the world playing with technology, or whether or not it's coming from the extraterrestrials, we don't know. This one is extraordinary. Look at this one. I mean, clearly not a cloud. I mean, when people say, "Oh yeah, that's a cloud," I'm like, I don't think so. Like, I would say that's a cloud, and this is a cloud, but this is obviously some kind of a cloud cover for some kind of a strange vessel or a strange ship. So, you just have to laugh at some of this stuff. Oh, that must be a weather balloon. Yep, that's it. Now look at this one, strange tubular cloud roll caught on film. Now, I've never in my life seen a cloud like this. Have any of you? Okay, well, we might say, okay, it's possible it's a cloud. Look at this next one. This is not a cloud. This is like a mothership hidden. I mean, this is a little vessel. This is taken from a sailboat of some sort. And here's another little sailboat. And here's the land. Look at the size of this thing. That is just extraordinary. My. That's all I can say. Now, this was from an aircraft carrier, and it was a lightning storm. But here is the UFO up in, lightning comes down and strikes the ground. That's the very nature of lightning, is it's looking to ground somewhere. This is why, it hits steeples and antennas and things like that. But this is some kind of electrical energy discharge from the UFO itself. Now, these are unusual. We have just started seeing these in the last, few years. They appear to be almost pyramid-like ships, and this is filmed over Colombia. An alien race that transverses the vast distances of space, in all likelihood, at faster than light speeds, and using stargates in giant pyramids or diamond-shaped UFOs, seems to be in the process of making contact with humanity. This does not even seem like it's aerodynamically intelligent. Frisbees or UFOs fly very quickly through the air, but here is a pyramid in the middle of the air. And what is this? It looks like it's a smaller ship beside the bigger ship. We don't really know. We can look at these things and we can speculate all day. Look at this one. This is two pyramids put end to end. Okay. And it's over a power plant. It's checking out a power plant in Japan. Well, this is 2010. So Fukushima, remember, guys? So I'm not actually sure what year Fukushima happened, but it seemed like to me it was shortly after this. So more than likely they were checking out the soundness of what was going on. They really are not eager for us to blow ourselves up or make our planet uninhabitable for any number of reasons. And it really has to do with energetic lines. There are things that are called synchronic lines, and they are like ley lines in the galaxy. Ley lines, as you know, carry the electromagnetic life force energy through the ground, and they're male and female, or positive charged and negative charges in these ley lines. And this is what a lot of the sacred sites was built on, because it's the convergence of meridians on the Earth's surface. In the heavens, there are also ley lines. They're just called synchronic lines. And most planets have between 4 and 7 synchronic lines. The more synchronic lines you have, hitting a planet or moving through a planet or in the planet or on the planet, the stronger the life force. Just like if you think about it in the human body, the major organs and along the spine and where the chakras are the convergence of 21 meridian points. So there are key chakras that if you lose a liver or you lose the heart or you lose your lungs, hey, you're going to die. They're key to the preservation of the whole body. And it's the same thing with the galaxy. There are 144 of these points, and 12 of them are major. And our solar system is one of the 12 major ones. Well, after we had Tiamat, or that planet where the asteroid belt is, be destroyed, which threw off a lot of debris and literally began siphoning off the oxygen and the water from Mars. And so can't really have a lot of life on Mars now. We're sort of like the last planet left, and we have, most planets have 4 to 7 of these lines. We have 18. So this is why we have such incredible diversity of flora and fauna on this planet. So this is why ships like this octahedron, and thank you, by the way, Martin Ball from Cottonwood, Arizona, for writing a little note to say the double pyramids and octahedron. Thank you very much for sharing that with us. This octahedron, very unusual ship. We haven't seen these before, but here's another picture. Here's another picture. This is why nobody wants to see us kill ourselves. This is from Taiwan. Look at this one. Amazing. Just incredible. Yes, and I know that some people call the planet that I was calling Tiamat Maldek. There are different names for it. And so those are the two most common, Tiamat and Maldek. Yes. And it was a big planet. It was probably, 5 times the size of Earth or more. And it was a water planet. There were human beings that lived on it. Probably some of the souls that are now on this planet were from that planet. Now, this is a mothership with 5 smaller ships from Casa Grande, Arizona. The sighting was January 2009, and this was shot by the MUFON State Director, Christine Dickey. And I've got a close-up of these little guys. Look, again, you can see the energy heat signatures that appear to be some kind of a plasma corona. This is a New Mexico light ship, and some of these ships, Jaime Maussan has shown incredible video where they appear to be organic. They move and change shapes, kind of like a strange organic pretzel. I mean, the feet curl up and they twist around like, those pipe cleaners, that are kind of like fuzzy covered wires. It's very much like that. Again, this is technology that we clearly do not understand. How can a ship change shape organically unless, in fact, it's partly an organic creature of some sort? Now, this is another one that's very interesting. This light ship, which emanates light, we're getting now into 4th dimensional ships and 5th dimensional ships, because, as I said, there are 3rd dimensional ones that are nuts and bolts, and we might even be able to back engineer most of those technologies. But once you get into the 4th and the 5th dimension, when they drop their ships into our airspace, we may see them or be able to interact with them for a while, but we would not be able to run these ships. I've been on board those ships. You actually have to you put your hand down on a console, and you have to be able to drop your busy little beta brain, which is the brain most of us run around in, into deep levels of alpha and theta in order to communicate with the ship and to be able to give it instructions. And as most of us know, we're trained to sort of keep our brainwaves in this busy beta. And so unless you learn to really meditate and focus, you would not really be able to direct a ship like that. But what's interesting about this light ship that emanates light from within is it looks very much like ships that have appeared in Mexico, and these images have been brought to us by Carlos Diaz, and I'll show you some of these. So this is another glowing UFO from the United Kingdom. Again, it's hard to know if this is 3rd dimensional or, in fact, it might be 4th dimensional. This is another one of these incredible light ships from Utah, and you can see sort of the difference in a lot of the ones I've been showing you and these. They have a whole nother energy signature. Now, this is a remarkable photograph. I live in Atlanta, Georgia, and I often go to breakfast at a place called First Watch, and I'm friends with all the waiters and waitresses there because many times with my books, I will go in the morning and I'll sit in there for 2 hours and write my books by hand and then come spend the day on the computer. Well, one morning I went in and there's a really lovely black guy there who actually was the busboy, and we've been friends. And he came over and he said, "Tricia, I have to show you this. I was at my my great aunt's house in Decatur, Georgia. I live, if you imagine Atlanta like it has a highway around it like a circle, like a clock. And if you imagine that I live at 11 o'clock on the perimeter of this highway that goes around the city's inside of it. Decatur's at about 3 o'clock. And so he had gone over to help his great aunt. And She had said, I'm hearing a ringing in my ears. Can you go outside and see if there's something out there? He walked out onto his grandmother's front porch, and it was 8:15 in the morning, and he sees this gigantic UFO hovering over the house across the street. And he had his cell phone, and he picked it up and took one picture. And he had just come from this when I saw him about 9:30 that morning. And of course, he was in a daze about it. He was like, my God, I can't believe it. And I was like, can you send it to me? So this just happened, I think, in November or December of last year. So it's the first time I've shown it. You guys are the first audience I've shared it with. But this was taken from a really high quality cell phone. And it's astonishing. I mean, if I didn't know this guy, I would think this was airbrushed, but this is a large ship, and you can sort of see there's some kind of writing on the edges here. I've tried to blow it up, but it kind of breaks up, so you can't see it. And then he sent me one that he had found that looked very similar, that was shot the week before, I think, in Tennessee. And so maybe it was literally the same ship, but pretty incredible, huh? Okay, so this is the Carlos Diaz case that I was talking about. This is a guy who's been having contact with human-looking Pleiadians, basically, and beings that are here to help our planet. He has over 23 original UFO films, most of which have never been published. His contact began in 1981 on a lonely road in the mountains of Mexico. He had an encounter with the UFO that changed his life forever. And I've heard Carlos speak. He's the real deal. 20 years later, the contacts continued. 12,000 eyewitnesses, including journalists, scientists, and the mayor of Mexico City, have now encountered this phenomena. And this is the mountains near where he lives, and he has video cameras and cameras set up. And you can see the ship, and here is a close-up of the ship, and he talks about the fact that these are organic light ships, so they're a combination of organic and physical hardware of some sort. But these beings are very beneficent, very helpful, and they're very concerned about the planet, very concerned about the decisions that we're making in our governments and our environmental waste. Okay, so now we're going to take a quick look. This is our last section of strange archaeology. Is everybody having a good time out there? Okay, we only got about 10 minutes, so I'm going to have to fly through this. I see. So first off, there are many different kinds of extraterrestrials, and I've encountered many of them in my life. They're visiting from the third and the fourth and the fifth dimension. And so many of you who are listening, even though we are wearing the bodies of human beings, and we are human beings, many of us have come from these third and fourth and fifth dimensional levels as part of the kind of awareness, wake up project to help our brothers and sisters on planet Earth. Many of these beings are humanoid in appearance. Some have 3 fingers, some have 4, some have 5, some have 6, and the same thing with toes. Some have webbed feet, some have bigger heads, some have hair, some don't have hair. Some of them are gorgeous by our standards, some of them are a little scary by our standards, but a lot of them are good. In recent years, there have been bodies of dead aliens found, and here is one that clearly was charred by some kind of a fire, perhaps in the crash of a ship. This is an alien body found in Siberia by 2 people out for a walk in the snow. And they basically, this alleged alien discovery follows reports of a UFO flying towards Earth in the nearby Irkutsk region of Siberia 1 month ago. This is an area where there have been hundreds of reports. And this little guy obviously froze to death. He had no fat on his body. He lost one of his legs. And so, he landed on planet Earth, and that was pretty much it. Now, this is an extraordinary story from Concepcion, Chile, from October of 2002. It was a family that was out on vacation, and their little girl actually found this small creature that was alive at the time. It literally could be held in her hands, and it survived for about 3 days, and then it died. And you can see the size of it. It's teeny. But when she first found it, it could open and close its eyes. It was still alive. According to this journalist, this bizarre creature was found in the bushes by one of the children on an outdoor trip. The little child picked it up and wrapped it in a piece of paper and claimed it stayed for alive about 8 days and even opened its eyes. And so, of course, what do the specialists say? Oh, it must be a fetus from a wildcat. So, I don't think so. Okay, so here we are. This is a Peruvian archaeologist found a 20-inch alien skeleton. This is one of the ones with a gigantic, look at the size of these eye sockets. And of course, Spanish and Russian scientists have examined it, and they've actually said that it has a non-human appearance because the head's triangular and big, almost the same size as the body. And they first thought it was a child's body. You can see the skeleton here in the shape of the head. And so they have actually said it's an ET, and bravo for the Spanish and the Russian doctors. Bravo that someone's telling the truth. Look at this one, a little alien baby found dead in Japan. So, you can see he had big eyes and his head was large. This is a case brought by Jaime Maussan, a Mexican sighting. This was only revealed after someone had taken a flash photograph in the dark and blew it up. This is another one. These are still frames from a video where a group of little gray beans were collecting soil samples, and they saw someone taking a picture, and you can see they came up to the fence, and the person took his last video and fled. This is, again, someone testing out their camera as they were walking by a graveyard. Only when they blew it up later and enlarged it and lightened it did they see this little creature who you can see his arm is literally about as long as his entire body. This is another one from Jaime Maussan. Here are two policemen in London who are riding their horses, and a little creature seems to be walking across the path, small as can be. These are like little people. Very interesting. Here is this very strange creature from Mexico. Again, large head and a strange kind of prehensile tail, very bony. So there are many things that have been found on this planet that are unexplained. And I'll show you just some of them very, very quickly. And I'm sure we could take longer with this, but we are running out of time. So I want to be aware of that. These are skulls of horned beings. So this actually was it was shipped over to Philadelphia, but of course afterwards it became mysteriously lost or stolen or misplaced. It was a whole group of things. Look at this one. This is a strange skull found in Brazil from a mummified body. It was on display at the museum on Sundays and under guard, and according to the owners, at least 10 efforts had been made to steal the item. Yeah, because if the ET thing's supposed to be covered up, how dare we? It looks like a skull from one of the guys from Alien or something, doesn't it? Very strange. I don't think I want to run into one of those dudes. This one's again a elongated skull in Mexico, and there are a lot of these that have been found all over the world. These craniums hold about 3,300 grams. We only have about 1,350 grams in our brain. So these are from the Anunnaki gods, and I could do presentations on that. So if you stick with Portals of Ascension, we'll send out a notice for when I'm going to be doing these. But these beings were highly telepathic, and they were very tall, very long-lived. This is a femur bone from one of these beings. And just to give you an idea, that I had the glyph, this, to see how long it is. I mean, this is almost as nearly as long as his whole body. What's interesting about this skeleton was there were 3 bullets found in the skull. And so it was found in 1856, and it was about 11-foot tall human. These are recent discoveries that have happened in Turkey, Scotland, Syria, Saudi Arabia, and India. This appears to be about a 21-footer. Here is one where they're excavating. Look at the size of the skull. It's almost the same size as the man squatting down. Incredible. These are giant axes, so they had to be tall enough to wield these axes. And as I will show when I do the presentation in Atlantis on February 28th, there were in fact beings that were, 10, 15, 20, 25, and 30 feet tall, and they did in fact wield these axes. Unfortunately, one of the things that's happened has been that the powers that be really want us to not make contact with these extraterrestrials because they're afraid to lose their power base. And so they teach us fear and they promote fear with movies like Independence Day and this new one that's coming out, Childhood's End, I've seen advertised. And I have a whole presentation really on this, but because we had to cut this down to 163 slides, this is actually my very last slide. And I hope all of you have really enjoyed this. And I don't know if we have any time for questions, even if it's 5 minutes or 2 minutes. I'm happy to. And if any of you would like to, you can go to my website, which is my name, TriciaMcCannon.com. So that's TriciaMcCannon, just like it sounds, Mac and Cannon, TriciaMcCannon.com. And you'll find there all sorts of books and classes and webinars and YouTube videos and, whole online series on the mysteries and DVDs. And feel free to call me. I'm in town working on my next book. Don't call me this weekend, though, because I'm teaching. So wait and call me next week. And if for any reason you call and I'm in the middle of a clairvoyant session, I'll just say, please call me back. So if you call and get my machine, you can leave your name and number and where you're from. And if it's in the States, I'll call you back. Thank you so much. I hope you guys enjoyed that.
I enjoyed it, Tricia. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Was that fun, seeing all those ET bodies?
It was. I mean, this is a lifetime of work collecting these pictures, isn't it?
It really is. It is. And I'm so glad you guys enjoyed it. Martin Ball from Cottonwood, Arizona, thank you for your wonderful comment. And, you guys, please do give me some feedback on this. I hope you enjoyed it. And by all means, feel free to go to my site and to get in touch with me. And thank you guys for your wonderful comments.
Yes,
Richard
great
from
comments here. Amazing presentation. Wonderful to see everything. Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, Richard from Pennsylvania and Dominique from Canada.
And Annette from Florida. They all really, well, you'll be at Contact in the Desert for sure in June.
Yes, and I'm hoping to do a whole ET series, maybe like a couple of different Saturday afternoons on the hidden history via this webinar, Portals of Ascension, with the wonderful Neil Gurr. So,
one thing you didn't talk about is the whole disclosure idea. How close do you think we are for public acknowledgement, awareness of this subject?
I think that there is a battle going on behind the scenes between those who don't want to live with the lies anymore and want to bring it out, and those who are really the old guard that are continuing to put lots of money in Hollywood behind movies like this Childhood's End. And that was a very good Arthur C. Clarke novel that was written 40 years ago, but it's the idea that the ETs, like V, come and park themselves and say, we're going to give you peace, end war, end disease, and so forth. And in the end, they're the boogeyman. And so
is that how Childhood's End ends? I thought they were lifting human population up. I haven't read it in a long time, but I thought it ends the upliftment, the ascension.
Yeah, how it ends after them doing all this good is that the guy that's telling the story gets a glimpse of them, and they are reptilians that look like the devil. Okay, and so it ends like, oh my gosh, have we been misled by the devil?
I thought the Earth ascends in that end book, in the end of that book.
I don't think so. But my point is this: that how come we can't get any good ET movies other than Spielberg, who made the gray aliens the good guys?
Well, he was an abductee, obviously, right?
Yes, he and George Lucas have definitely been in the know and been channeling, that old Andromedan war that happened in the heavens. That's what George Lucas has been channeling with Star Wars. So, yeah.
The last Star Wars, I thought, lacked some plot development. So,
well, they're feeling their way. It's amazing to have 9 movies on one subject. And so, bravo that they even brought the concept of the Force. And I mean, what movies can you...
a spiritual presence, yes.
Yes, and that there is a positive galactic force as well as a negative. And I think by and large, there's mostly positive, but we are so polarized in our dual consciousness down here. It's us and them, and the military industrial complex makes a fortune on wars. And so, never mind that all these people are killed and maimed, and we could move out of this.
I know, but part of things, teachings that you have is the spiritual presence of, these ETs. And, I think that's also what Grant Cameron will get into. He was a hardcore researcher, but then he had some kind of conscious awakening in relationship to the ET presence. So,
Well, this is totally true. I mean, so many of my colleagues, when I first started speaking, and they're all good people, but it was all fear and negativity and so forth, because of course they were freaking out over the cattle mutilations and the human abductees. But because my contacts have been with extremely high consciousness groups, I know those groups are real. I know they exist, and that those are the speaker before me was talking about the watchers that really have sown the garden of humankind. They let us go. As long as we're not going to destroy ourselves, they hopefully, like children, we learn our lessons. And
right. And then I have to go. I just want to say one more thing. I think we're at a portal shift. A portal to ascension actually is happening right at this point in time. And I think part of this 3 days of presentations is lifting the energy so we can be in a greater vibratory awareness. And that's what I think we're at right now.
I love that. And when you ask me about when the disclosure is, there have been a lot of us that have been at this now for 20 years. You and I are two of them, and many of our colleagues that'll be speaking this weekend are among them. But, I don't think they're going to come online. I mean, poor Obama. I mean, my goodness, that poor guy who was a being of the light. We see what kind of resistance he had just with, the economy and the corporation. So I still don't think that the consciousness of a lot of people in the government are willing to take the chance that the stock market will plummet, and that people will run screaming in fear from their houses, or Bubba will get his shotgun and go out and start shooting. And so,
I think, though, we're coming to a different time frame. I do think that Hillary Clinton, if she gets in, I'm not like a big fan of her politics, but I did sense an energy around her when I met her that was here for a greater destiny.
I totally agree.
Okay,
I totally agree.
Go, because Grant is waiting for us.
Sure, no problem. Can I just give my website?
Sure, of course.
Again, it's TriciaMcCannon.com, and I really thank you so much, Alan, for being such a gracious host, and Neil behind the scenes making everything happen. And thank you, my audience, for such wonderful comments. Joan Oliver and Beta Joy and Joe and all of you for just such wonderful feedback. And I hope I get a chance to talk with you again.
Well,
God bless.
I look forward to seeing you, Trish. Love hearing from you. And,
much love, my friend.
Yes, I'll see you soon. Lots of love. Thank you.
Bye.